All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome out to the webinar today. My name is Ryan Leary from Recruiting Daily. We have a bunch of people coming onto the call, so we're gonna hang tight for a couple of seconds here as we allow people to connect into audio. But we have an exciting webinar today. We've got a phenomenal presenter. We've got three really strong supporters for a reason, for a purpose on this webinar. And so excited to introduce all of them as well in just a moment. So the webinar today is what you should start, and continue with diversity and inclusion recruitment. So we're going to have a really good conversation around diversity and finding a presenter for today. We took a lot of time to find someone that we felt could represent this topic very well, both professionally and personally. And then and that person, we wanted that presenter to have a real purpose behind the presentation, not just a slide deck. And I think we've accomplished that for this webinar. So we are really super excited. Balazs, can you go forward to the next slide? Okay, good. So here's a couple of things we need to know today as we get started. Everybody on the call is in listen-only mode. That means that you can hear us. We cannot hear you. However, we are recording the call, so there will be a lot of information today. We are going to record it. At the end of the webinar, we will send an email. You will have a couple of really good items in there to download as well as a thank you. But in that email, you'll get a recording. You will also get a link to the slides. So don't worry about screenshotting and recording and all of that. We're going to handle that for you. And you can go on to the next slide. Okay, so before we kick off, let me just take a moment here. I want to thank the three companies that we're working with here to help support the webinar. We've got Olio on the call. Jason will introduce in a moment. Yellow as well, and Lever. I'm sure you guys have all heard of these three techs in the space. They've cemented their position in the space, and so we're excited that they're here to help share this story with us. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's the plan today. We have Balazs, who I'll introduce in a second, is going to be presenting. We're going to talk about a couple of items that are listed on the agenda around what companies should start doing, what they need to stop doing, continue doing. Essentially, it's a conversation around diversity and inclusion and recruitment. So let's go ahead and get some introductions. So presenting today, we've got the man himself, Balazs, and I promised I wouldn't try to say his last name, but Balazs is the VP of Global Sourcing over at Cielo Talent, heads up the RPO there, which is an amazing company. So Balazs, welcome into the call, and we'll let you do a kind of a full intro on yourself in a second. But before we do that, I wanted to give both Brenna and Jason on the call today a moment or two to share why they're here and why they're supporting this particular webinar. So Brenna is with Lever. Welcome, Brenna.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, go ahead. You take it from here.
Yeah, okay, great. So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today. Brenna here from Lever. I'm our Senior General and Administrative Recruiter. I've been here for about 2.5 years. I work basically on any role that isn't sales and isn't on tech, so I'm lucky enough to work across a variety of different teams. And across all organizations in Lever, we have a really strong focus on diversity and inclusion. D&I is something that's super important. All modern companies are working on their D&I efforts, and it's not necessarily something that's easy to do. It is a bit of a newer focus for a lot of companies, so there aren't a ton of, quote unquote, experts in the field. The best of intentions can be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean successful outcomes. So at Lever, this has been a focus of ours from the very beginning. In the early days of being a 10-person company, for example, we had a D&I task force. So why? Why is this important to us, and why is this important for you? Well, diversity on your teams leads to a variety of perspectives. It means a holistic approach to problem solving and makes sure that your team is as strong as possible. If you're only replicating the skill set on your existing team, you're only tackling your strategy and your execution the same way over and over again. And when you say diversity, most people's mind goes to things like protected classes like gender and ethnicity. And one thing I've learned working at Lever is that making sure that you're reaching out to those types of underrepresented groups is incredibly important. diversity also means a lot more than that. It means things like people who have families and may not be able to do evening team building events, people who don't drink alcohol and so aren't necessarily comfortable with that kind of like go-to activity of a happy hour, people, for example, from non-traditional educational backgrounds. So to that point, diversity and inclusion is often talked about, but people tend to forget the I, inclusion. You can hire a diverse workforce, but without an inclusive environment, people from those underrepresented groups aren't likely to stay. So then this means thinking about how to make a comfortable environment for all people. So doing team events over lunch, for example, making sure that events are welcoming to all of your team members. When all is said and done, every person has a unique and individual perspective to offer, and having as many viewpoints as possible to strategize, problem solve, and honestly, even just challenge each other is key to your team's success. And that's why we focus really strongly on diversity and inclusion here at Lever.
Very good. And we got Jason Daniels from Olio. Jason, welcome in.
Great. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. At Olio, we believe the power to make a positive impact on the world is infinitely more possible when you assemble diverse teams of people with the right skills and shared motivations. McKinsey's study actually on diversified thinking showed us that diverse teams of the right talent are 4 times more productive. As a matter of fact, that same study further highlighted that diverse teams or diversity itself serves as a trigger. It makes people dig deeper, work harder, and question themselves. It also helps us to understand that we can have healthy conflict of opinion that leads to better outcomes. So simply put, there's tremendous value in diversity. Diversity is the very essence of who Olio actually is. As a matter of fact, our company name Olio means a diverse collection of things that come together to make something beautiful. So really to be excited to be part of this discussion today. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you both, Lever and Olio, and Yellow as well, who unfortunately could not be here today to join us live on the call. But thank you all for supporting such an important webinar for us. So Balaj, I'm going to pass it over to you if you want to, and I'm sure most people on the call know who you are. They've seen you out there on the interwebs, as we call them. But I'm going to pass it off to you. Let you go through your own intro, and then let you kick off from there. And for everyone that's on the call, before we do that, there is a questions panel on your right-hand side. There's going to be a ton of information today. So go ahead and add your questions in. We will try to get them as they come in. We may take some at the end, but we're going to try to filter them in throughout as well. So go ahead and load up your questions throughout the webinar, and we will get those over to Balaj and let him answer them live. So Balaj, I'm going to stop talking and pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you so much all for making this great occasion to talk about diversity and inclusion. Just one slide about myself. So because some people may not know me, may not have ever heard about me. So my name is Balaj, and I work for a company called Seattle Talent. I run basically the global sourcing practice, which means that I'm tasked to level up and to constantly evolve our sourcing excellence. I don't want to talk about too much about myself, but I really want to talk about Seattle. So Seattle, may not be known as as the regular huge, giant size recruitment services providers. However, Seattle Talent is the market leader RPO provider. So in the recruitment outsourcing field, we are basically really ruling the world, if I can say that. So Seattle has been famous for a few things. But just recently, last year, we've got the fame, and I'm extremely proud about that our CEO, so Sue Marks, has been the ever first RPO leader, CEO, who's joined the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion Club, if you wish. So that's a gang, that's a club, that's a a committee of various other CEOs, who really stand up and stand for D&I. And who believe that they have to have a voice, they have to have a well visible commitment towards this whole topic. So working for this company, that certainly gives me a lot of pride and a lot of energy. And beside my global sourcing role, I also play a role in our internal LGBTQ community. So that's who I am, and that's my route. But I also wanted to give you some private or some personal attachment to this whole topic. So D&I has not always been important for me, okay? Don't get me wrong, it's always been recognized, but I don't always leave DNI, didn't always have to leave DNI, okay? So my life really changed some years ago, some 2.5 years ago, when I was married. I was having a family. And 2.5 years ago, I just fell in love with a man, okay? So I turned to be gay. And that was a moment when basically, well, the moment when you turn to be gay, that's the moment when, your whole world fall apart. Everything, a big chaos, and you really try to rebuild everything around yourself. And now being a, sourcing thought leader, being a global leader with a company, and then, going through all of these changes, I mean, that gives you a pretty nice, challenging period of life. Now, I live in Hungary. I live in a country which is not the only country which is not too supportive towards to minorities. And since I came out, I had to understand, how challenging sometimes it can be to be a representative of a minority, how difficult life can be, how life can change. Prior to my story, I was one of the great members of the majority. I was a white, married, 2 children person living in the post side of Budapest in Hungary, running a international recruiting practice. After that one, I turned to be a gay man. I'm not anymore a man, I'm a gay man. And that whole change, brings a lot of new challenges to life. So that was my start, towards to this whole topic, and certainly my whole country. So Hungary is not, well, how to put it this way? So Hungary is not the most accepted country on the planet, unfortunately. So Hungary still seems to be having challenges, by accepting gay people. So just recently, there was a show in the television promoting how to cure gay people, so gay conversion, so converting gay people back to regular heterosexual people, and that was broadcasted in the national big television channel. But also Hungary thinks, so the government thinks today that women's primary role is secondary to the man's role, and women's primary role is to, is basically just to make babies. Also, this government is having challenges, to accept migrants. So the whole immigrant story around Europe, that's been a really drastic, huge challenge, for this government. But Hungary is not alone, with all of these questions, and we see, a lot of increasing challenges and, and concerns around the planet with all of these DNI questions. So that's why I'm 100% committed to this topic, and that's why I'm always saying, we have to talk about this one, and we have to look for actions how we can do these things better. So today, I don't want to talk about Hungary anymore. I don't want to talk about my background. I really would like to talk about, what companies can do, and how can we build better DNI campaigns and programs, and how can we basically build a more and most complete life for employees. So that's for now. That's for today. The number one question I like to think about is that why is it difficult for people to handle difference? Why is it, beside the regular shame and whatsoever, right? But why is it so challenging to accept the fact that some other people might be different than us? And one of the answers, I was getting was from a brilliant speaker. So Yevanda Iga, she's having a brilliant talk about DNI on LinkedIn Talent Connect. I think it was 2 years ago. And she started her talk with a statement that we've all been wired to discriminate. So if you think about the humankind, if you think about, just the human being, basically the way how we are raised, the way how we, how our culture evolved. So basically, we've been raised and our culture has been evolved in a way that we were taught to recognize the different. Because, we were, in the same time also, we were taught to recognize the similar. So things which are close to us, things which are close to our culture. And at the same time, watch out for things, which are different than us, which are different than our culture, different than our religion, different than our sexual orientation, different than our skin whatsoever, right? So it's a normal human thing. That's basically how we raise our children, right? We raise our children to make them recognize what is close to to our family, because what is close to our family, that's safe. What is unsure, what is unknown, that may have a certain element of risk, that may have a certain element of harm. So they rather watch out, they rather step a little back and think about that thing. So basically, I think there's the very first step that we all need to understand, that is just a human thing, that we may feel some concerns towards the difference. And it's been running for a long time in our whole global culture. I like to use this sample from the brilliant Mozart. We all love Mozart, and we all love the magic flute, right? That's just a masterpiece. However, within this masterpiece, the only non-white character is the enemy. Okay, so that's been wired to discriminate, because that time, back to the 18th century in Europe, in so-called white Europe, that was a differentiation, right? That was something which probably was a little seen as dangerous or harmful or risky, and that was the representation on stage of this phenomenon. But that was the 18th century. If you think about Mrs. Doubtfire, and hopefully you guys will not kill me, so Ryan, you can switch me up if you wish, but hopefully I'm right. I just recently watched Mrs. Doubtfire with my children, and that was featured like 1994. And while Mrs. Doubtfire is clearly promoting the diversity of families, right? So if you remember, that's the very end monologue of of the main character, when he's talking about all of the differences that we can have within within families, right? So like a dad-only family is just as good as a four people family whatsoever. But so that's while it's promoting family diversity, it's still not promoting any races. So still within this movie there's only white characters. And if you remember the moment when Mrs. Doubtfire was applying to the babysitter job, she was imitating the accent of other minorities. So I'm not saying that's a like entirely bad thing. I'm just saying that even the last 20 years, our whole approach to D&I has changed so much and had to change so much. So even in such a full of heart movie like Mrs. Doubtfire, today with our current eye, we can spot some elements which may not be compliant anymore. So that's important. That was the starting point. And by the way, that's how we all have been wired to somewhat discriminate. So how can we change this one? And that's really important. What is the very first step? Now, the very first step is that at a certain point of time, we have to hire someone who's just not like us. But that very first step can be super difficult. Why? Because if we just hire, let's say, someone who is different than us, who is different than the rest of the team, basically that person can be easily victimized. That person can be easily be the victim of being different. So I'm not saying that this lady, this minister in Japan, she's any victim. I just want to show you this picture because I think this picture gives some sort of impression how challenging, how difficult it can be to be the very first in a super homogeneous culture. And as long as the culture itself, as long as all the people within the existing group, as long as they are not yet ready to accept the different person, probably that person will not be able to succeed. So that's the very first step, that we need to start conversation. We need to start a dialogue with all of our existing employees to recognize and realize the difference. That yes, we are different, and there are differences among people, but that's all fine. And then hopefully we will not look like this, but like this. So this is today's Canada's cabinet. This is all of their ministers. And if you have a look on this picture, I mean, you see the total picture of diversity, and you don't anymore question how they can hire minorities, how they can hire women, how they can hire people like in a wheelchair, right? This is the end goal of every D&I program. But how can we get there? So what companies usually do is that they start promoting D&I, right? They start having both internal and external communication. What I would like to highlight with this visual is that this is from one of the oil and gas company in Hungary. They are basically the biggest oil and gas company on the entire CEE region. It's a huge company. And I think these visuals are helpful. And first of all, these are all new, right, for them. It's a brand new initiative. What I want to highlight is that you always need to think about that who is left out. So while on these pictures you see you see various nationalities, right? You see not only Hungarians but also some Slovak people, or that might be an Arabic person, in the middle left side. But you also need to think about that who's left out, from this collection of people, because whoever is left out, that may somehow reflect on your internal fears or internal challenges. For instance, from my perspective, I don't see any other people in these pictures. I don't see, any LGBT sign on these pictures. They might be there, but, that's not something I would recognize. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, first of all, you need to have a dialogue, and that's the very, 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 very first step. You have to have an open, honest dialogue with all of your employees. So this is, what I'm doing since I joined Cielo, and I've taken this, LGBTQ job. And again, the today story is not all about gay people, right? It's the whole context of D&I. But when I was in Manila, I wanted to sit down with those guys, and I wanted to have a really open dialogue about LGBTQ. The reason, because, well, first of all, these are young people, so they may be curious, they may need some help. They may want to meet someone who's happy in his current role, but also on the other side that the Philippines is a really Catholic country. So being gay in a Catholic country might be super challenging. So for those people, that might be helpful for them, not only to little ventilate, but also to share their stories with their ally team members, right? With non-gay people as well. So we were facilitating a meetup in Manila about the whole LGBTQ question. And we had something like 20, 30 people joining us, not only LGBTQ members, but allies. And for those allies, it was an eye-opener. And I think that's the very, very first step, how companies have to start eliminating the fear and educating their employees about the difference that exists among people. The other point which I like to show is that when you go for an external communication, so this is Intel, and this is on their website. It's all publicly available. So Intel decided to put all of their D&I initiatives to their career website. So you can see everything. And what is important that this is not perfect. And they're not saying it's perfect. They're not stating it's all right. But but they are stating where they are. And they see progress, and they make progress, and they report on that progress. But it's still only 26.8% female versus the rest male, right? It's still like that. But at least they started to have an open and transparent dialogue. This is the GoDaddy, GoDaddy, that's an internet company. This is their website. So this is their diversity website, and you can see and read all about their salaries and also their salary gaps. Well, it's not anymore a gap, thanks God, but you still see the differences. Okay, that's the right start. You have to start the discussion internally and also externally, and you have to put all of these things to your career website. Why? Because if I'm a D&I member, and yes, I am, and I go to your career website, I want to see these signs. I want to read about these things. I know what I want to recognize on your career website. So you'd rather put all of these things there. So the next point, the next thought, the next idea that I learned about handling this difference, handling diversity, that was coming from, Kristen Pressner. So she's a HR leader for Roche, if I'm not mistaken. And she's got a really, really famous, I think it's a TED talk. Yeah, it's a TED talk about biases, about unconscious biases. And basically her whole story was all about that. She's an HR leader, and she had a male employee going to her asking for a raise. And she said, yeah, sure, at the end of the month, let's get back to this whole question and we will fix it. And a week after, one of her female employees went to her asking for a raise. And her immediate reaction was like, well, didn't we increase your salary, like a half year ago? Didn't we have a correction? So while her natural reaction was all positive towards to the male, her reaction towards the female employee was different. And that's her story. And that's her story, like, it's super honest. She is a global HR director, and she is talking about her biases. And the her story is that was the moment when she understood that unconscious, so how unconscious bias live with us, how our brain is driven by these biases. And by the way, she's built a slogan, or she's built a really easy practice. She calls it flip it to test it, which I pretty much like. I like a lot. So she's saying that whenever you feel something being not correct, just flip it. Just flip it, to the other side of the statement, just to understand whether it's a bias-driven concern or it's a real concern. So to give you, some examples. So I have some story about, about this whole point. Have you heard about the story when there was an orchestra? There was an orchestra that, for some reasons, only hired male musicians. There was a symphonic orchestra. And they didn't really, they tried everything. They brought in all the best women, but nothing really helped. And there was a moment when they understood that basically they should have a blind audition. They should try to, turn off the jury being not able to see the musicians. Because, they wanted the jury, they wanted the leadership of the orchestra to only focus on the music itself and not on the musician. And the moment when they turned back to the musicians, basically they started to hire women. So one of the things, how we can turn around, like these biases that we, is to run these type of blind things. This is what we got, with a voice, right? There's the same reason, there's the same purpose, to only listen to the music, to only listen to the talent, to only listen to the skill set, and not even trying to be anyhow driven by an unconscious bias. This is a great story. I call it great. Well, it's a failure, but I think it's super great, and it's super humble that Amazon decided to share it with the world. So Amazon was working for years to build a CV screening system, so a CV screening algorithm, so an AI-driven platform, to assess, the CVs, so the paper CVs of their technology people. But because the whole algorithm was developed by men, these men unconsciously built in, basically they built in a rejection system towards to women candidates. They didn't realize that much. It wasn't their purpose, for sure, not at all. But because the way how they assessed those CVs, they didn't realize that they were bringing in all of those unconscious bias to the assessment platform. And when, once Amazon realized that big mistake, then they certainly, went public, and they started to talk about this one. And I think this is super, super great and super important, because we all need to understand, how these things work. Conducting blind screening can be a solution. In cases when a company is not yet ready, or when we feel like a company is or some managers are driven by potentially by biases. As a test, running blind screening or blind CV screening can be a great solution. But in that case, not only do we have to remove the name or all of those, we have to remove all of those signs and characteristics of the CV that may refer to a certain minority. If we realize that we are hiring too few female candidates, then we need to remove all of those language elements that refer to someone who's a woman, right? So that's how it works. I like to use this one. So this screenshot, this is from LinkedIn. It's from a developer's. So it's a developer's LinkedIn profile. He's a great developer living somewhere in Europe, I think. And this is his summary. And the reason I like to bring it because I think these type of examples help us understand our biases. So when you read something like this, and I tested, with a group of recruiters, usually people have usually people think like this is not appropriate to talk about, our religious connection, right? He's saying like, whatever is that, desktop application using Adobe Air and .NET framework. I like reading, researching, teaching, and more than anything else, I love Jesus Christ. So most people, in the industry who I talk to, who I show this, this expert, they said, oh, it's too much. You should not do that. You should not share this information with the whole world. And I think these are the right questions. That why not? Is it a problem? Do we, is it a bias? Is it something we would need to? Can we reject someone if we know that, for instance, that development group is, let's say, full atheist? Would that cause any problem? Or having an atheist group of developers, I mean, is that strong enough reason to reject someone who is full in love with Jesus Christ? And I think these situations are really helpful to understand how deep our unconscious bias usually live and exist within us. I just try to go to the next slide. Okay, so this is something I personally learned from Lever. So hey guys at Lever, thank you so much for that study. I learned that sentence for me was clearly eye-opener when it said ban culture fit as a reason for rejecting a candidate. Stop using he's not a culture fit, she's not a culture fit, she's reject. It's not a reason. Culture fit, there is culture add, right? So not everyone has to be a culture fit. There can be people in your organization. There can be someone who believes in Jesus Christ that can be a cultural add. Not everyone has to be a cultural fit. Cultural fit basically leads to a fully homogeneous company. So as long as we say that our culture is this like just like this or that, basically with that one we build a certain separation, and we start to we go against D&I because we are closing our doors, shutting down our doors, towers to different people who may not fit to our culture. I was recently contacted for a job with a job for a company, and then I understood that company, the leadership of that company is vegan, so they don't eat meat. But not only are they vegan, but they decided to not promote meat in any corporate event. So basically they create a really serious cultural fit, like culture that bans probably the 90% of the whole whole industry. So stop using cultural fit. So when your manager is getting back to you saying like, well, I like that candidate, he or she was technically strong, yeah, the right expertise, but he's not a cultural fit. I mean, you have to start asking questions. because that probably is driven by a bias. If you want to learn about how to manage unconscious bias, I like to refer to this from Facebook. So Facebook has created a whole curriculum about how to manage unconscious bias. The same, by the way, you can find on Harvard. So if you're interested, I can send you the link to that study as well. But the Facebook course is it's full of videos, and it's a extremely deep and extremely engaging lecture of how to manage unconscious bias. This is something I love, and again, Lever is my best friend in this call. But Lever has gathered together more than 50 ideas, like tactics, basically, how we can boost our D&I activities. And what I like a lot is that there are so non-obvious things, which I highlighted in teal on this slide, like 23. I love that one the most. I just told Brian I love that the most. Like, check the temperature of your office, because the office temperature, your work environment, has connections to D&I, right? Men traditionally like to, more prefer to work in a little bit cooler environment. So there are so many hidden and so many non-obvious things that basically are there and that just don't support D&I, right? So you really need to have an eye on all of these things. And the last thing I wanted to bring in today, in terms of to understand why it's difficult to handle difference, is another excellent talk from a linguistic teacher, professor, and she's talking about the fact that even our language has been wired to discriminate. So there's this exercise which is I think probably many of you have seen before. But this exercise and exercises like these can really reveal the fact that even our language is sometimes going against D&I. So if you think about this one, so a father and son are in a horrible car crash that kills the dad. The son is rushed to the hospital. Just as he's about to go under the knife, the surgeon says, "I can't operate. That boy is my son." And what is super interesting is that I was running some tests, with my friends, and something like 70% of my friends, they just didn't get the question. They said, "This is impossible. I mean, the dad died, right? So how is it possible that the dad would, And there are so obvious answers to this question. First of all, the word surgeon is not exclusively a male word. However, when we hear surgeon, when we think about, the ER, that was the emergency movie, right? Or, TV series. The surgeon as such most often has a male character, but doesn't have to be a male. I mean, the surgeon certainly can be a woman. Or, by the way, that son could have two dads, right? So there are answers to this question. But again, it's just showing us that even the language itself, our semantics, been wired to discriminate. So we really need to pay attention to the language that we use. And what is really important, that we need to accept the fact that even our language is not perfect. Even our language, just the words that we use, can hurt other people. So we really need to think about the words that we use. And by the way, we can change the words that we use. We don't have to use these words, and we can even create new words. So Cielo, as an RPO company, we've partnered with Talvista. And because Talvista, has developed a product to support all of the job advertisement, job posting, and to look for that content, and really build that type of texting, which is D&I proof, if you wish. So it's sort of a similar like industry like textile. Textile, you may have heard about that one. But also, you can think about, there are other tools like, like what you see on the screen. You will get the slides. Those are all out there to help you understand whether a job posting, for instance, whether an email, whether an offer that we are going to send to a candidate may contain some words, some expressions that go against D&I. So if I think about D&I, I love to talk about an evolution. Okay, I think D&I is basically not two things but three. I think D&I stands for diversity and then inclusion, and then it must stand for completeness. And I think completeness will be the third level of D&I. The way I see D&I, I think D&I, diversity, is all about to recognize and realize the difference that exists among people and eliminate the fear. Don't get scared. Yes, his skin is non-white. Yes, he loves men and is a man. Yes, he's handicapped. He's living in a wheelchair. He's not living, but struggling with a wheelchair. There are differences among people which clearly won't bring risk or harm or threat to our life. Okay, so eliminate this fear. That's the diversity. That's the first step. The second step, when we understood that the difference is not a bad thing, then we start enjoying the difference. Then we start enjoying, then we start celebrating the difference. We start celebrating diversity among our employees. Usually there's the moment when, companies open various employee resource groups, right? That's what we did and we do within Seattle. We have our groups, for all of these, for some of these minorities. And that's what I call inclusion. When we understood the difference and then we embrace difference, when we bring in all of those different people, if you wish, to the majority of the company. That's what I call inclusion. But I think we should never stop here. We should really aim to go further. And further is completeness. And I think completeness is something that, we think about a company where everyone has the same rights. Minorities will not anymore need to go into ERGs, resource groups, because why? I mean, why would they bother? Completeness means equal life, equal rights, equal conditions. Everything should be equal. And I think that should be the next evolution of the whole D&I story. I just wanted to show you this one. So this is that was 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. Deloitte decided to eliminate, they just shut down, their ERGs, because they understood that ERGs can, not always, but can actually build separation. So the ERG may not be the ultimate answer, to inclusion. So as a closing, if I think about the title of the today's webinar, so what to stop, start, and continue doing with these, within D&I, I want to differentiate the answers by these three categories. So I will try to read line by line, so row by row. So let's see what to stop. So I'm saying that stop recruiting diverse candidates when your stakeholders are not yet ready. Don't victimize anyone. Stop pretending all is good for change if we are still driven by unconscious bias. Okay? Stop rejecting candidates because of cultural fit. Stop building ERGs, employee resource groups, only to increase separation. Don't build those minority groups just to separate them from the majority of your company. Stop promoting only diverse employees on your website and in your company or corporate communication. That's a typical, a pitfall. When a company really try to do their best and most on D&I, suddenly all they do is that they promote diversity. No. You have majority people, and you have to promote all. And stop getting satisfied with any diversity result. Never forget that we've been wired to discriminate. And this is a really, archaical, it's a really I think it's coming from the human kind. So we have a lifetime work to do, like with this whole acceptance and D&I. So, but what to start doing? Well, start leading discussions around diversity internally and certainly externally. Start running solid educational programs about D&I. D&I is not just a thought. So as long as people only say, well, I have no problem with gays, that's nothing. You have to educate them. You have to tell them, how gay couples live. I have to explain to my colleagues that, what my children live through when I introduce them my boyfriend. It's education. Start introducing blind audition if you need. I don't think blind audition is the end goal. Don't get me wrong. But I think that's a good tactic when you need a tactic. Start using inclusive language, your website, your offers, your every written communication, job posting, advertisement. Start creating an inclusive work environment, right? Is your whole office accessible to all? Is it really inclusive? Do you have, think about the toilet story. You surely have a toilet for men, one for women. What about transgender people? Which one should they use? I have no answer, but this is a real question. Start supporting minority events. But again, when you say support should mean action. Okay, so support is not words only, but support is words, presence, but also budget. And start measuring and validating how complete life your employees have at work. Run a survey, ask them, and then be honest and frank when you read the results. And, so I don't know what to continue. I mean, because it depends on company by company, right? But the only thing I'm 100% sure is that we have to continue the fight for total acceptance and maximum promotion of every human difference. And finally, I want to share another personal story with you guys. And that was going back to my coming out blog, okay? So before I hit the publish button on LinkedIn, I had only one fear. One fear is that, my coming out would go live public on LinkedIn with a picture of my children and my boyfriend with a really honest, true story. And I would get a troll like trolling on me. And I can tell you, I've got like hundreds of likes and a lot of positive comments till the moment when I've got my first troll. And there was a gentleman like really going against me, saying like, asking like, what kind of role model are you for your children? What is the takeaway from this? That's the regular troll. That was my biggest fear. That was the fear that almost blocked me to post it. And when I had my first troll, I can tell you, the first time I was entirely sad. I was really close to just delete the whole blog post. But then the next morning when I woke up, I said, you know what? Okay, so trolls exist, but this is a fight. That's why we have to fight. That's why, because even when you are super honest, when you don't cause any trouble to anyone, still there are people who don't understand you and they may attack you just because they don't get it. So that's why we have to talk about this one. That's why we have to, stand up for this cause. And that's why we have to do everything to make people understand that being different is just brilliant. So that was it from my end. We have a few minutes left for questions. If you have any questions, I guess I just give back the mic to you, Ryan, and let's see how it ends.
We can keep this slide up. Balazs, thank you so much. This has been such a great presentation, and the story is wonderful. We've got a lot of questions. We don't have a ton of time, so we've got about 9 or 10 minutes left, so we can fly through a bunch of these. And let's just we'll answer them concise, and then if we have to expand, we can do so after. So let me just fly through a couple of these here. In the beginning, you were talking about having events, and the question is, does that mean all events have to be suitable for all people at all times, or is it appropriate to have multiple activities to appeal to a variety of different preferences and interests?
Right, it's a really good question. So I think that there are events which are more minority-driven events, right? So think about something like a Pride. I'm sorry for always using my kids, but but there are so many other events, right? Think about like the winter holidays, right? The winter celebration, right? It's not Christmas for everyone, it's Hanukkah for for Jewish people, and every nation, every culture, every religion have their own event, right? If it's important for a company, then the company should like step up for these events and support these events, right? That's one thing. The other is that there are events which are supposed to like to be held for the entire company. So think about family events, family days. I tell you that for many gay people, it's difficult to bring their partners to a family event because they don't know what will happen, right? So when you think about a family event, don't only think about the heterosexual, like that type of family, but think about all of the alternative families. So, and when you think about those families, you also need to make sure that you 100% clearly, transparently communicate that everyone is invited. So yeah, that's how I think about the event part.
Okay, good. So let's keep going here. Give me a sec. All right, do you have any recommendations around making underrepresented people feel included, for example, during happy hours or during other team events?
Yeah, so so I think again, this is the evolution, right? So depending on where the company is, today I believe that everyone wants to be seen normal, So I don't want to be seen as a gay man. I want to be seen as a man, right? So is it a good idea to separate and to promote minorities in this way? Maybe longer term, not. Is it the end goal? Not, clearly not. If you think about the Canadian cabinet, right? So there is many diversity, but it's not the whole point, right? The whole point is that these are all smart ministers of the country. So is it the end goal? Not. Is it something on the evolutionary path? Yes, I think clearly yes. So there's a moment when when this is all new for a company. So then there's a certain mode how you can get to to complete this, right? So how you lead your company through diversity and then inclusion. Yeah.
Okay. So we have there's a bunch of questions around having discussions and addressing this inside of the company at all various sizes so people asking the questions from various size companies. So let me just kind of boil it down to this. Can you provide an example of a successful way to host discussions around diversity if we have a medium-sized company, and kind of replace medium with large or small because there's a bunch of questions, company where not all employees can be in the same room together to discuss?
Right. So I think that today we leave the world of various networks, right? So we leave the world of Facebooks and LinkedIn's and Twitters and Instagrams, right? And there are corporate solutions, to connect with each other. I especially think that that's really the so companies will have to have internal digital networks, like things like Facebook type of things, to really build connectivity among the entire company. So once you have such a network, then basically your internal communication is greatly supported. So I can use a CIO example. And again, an LGBTQ, but that's what where I had my job with, with our story. So when we had the in October we had the National Coming Out Day. So for that, for that day and for that week, basically we were preparing a lot, and we were inviting a lot of LGBTQ members from the planet, from the CLO universe, and we invited them to share their coming out stories. And this is a pretty sensitive topic, right? And not everyone was ready to share their stories. However, we had something like 10, 15 people, and really people from from Manila, from Buenos Aires, from the States, from UK, Hungary, whatsoever, who really who were bold enough to share their story in this Seattle corporate network. And those stories were visible for every employee. And so once after we shared these stories, I mean, the reaction and the acceptance and that pure love that we receive from the rest of the company, I mean, that was extremely beautiful. So yes, you cannot always facilitate an in-person meetup, but yeah, I mean, like, you can use the digital channels, and I think you really should use those channels.
Okay, so not too long ago, a few slides back, you mentioned, it was on a stop, start, continue slide. You have stop recruiting diverse candidates when your stakeholders are not ready. We have 4 or 5 questions around that. Can you explain what you meant there?
Yes. So I met like many companies, like many companies approach me, how to source diverse candidates, right? And the problem is that you can, so there are various practices, how you can source, like the women, how you can find women only, how you can find African American people whatsoever. The challenge is that this should not be your first step, because think about 100% male engineering group, a team of, let's say, 10 male engineers who have never ever worked together with a woman, and then without giving them any help and any support, without having them any conversation, out of the blue, just because to support D&I and because to support your stats and and data, you hire a first woman to that group. And maybe your team of developers like middle-aged, or in the age of 40, 50, 60, and you hire, let's say, a fresh grad. I mean, these situations, if you don't help from a HR perspective, if you don't support, these situations can be super challenging for that woman, because there is no way, there's no any legacy, there's no any tradition, practice like being built within that group to make that woman become successful and as equally successful as all the other men. And it's just a random example, right? And hopefully these examples don't exist. Well, they do exist, we all know, right? But hopefully they will somehow disappear. But that's why I'm saying that first step, don't focus on recruiting or sourcing diverse employees. First step, focus on communication, focus on understanding, focus on recognizing difference. Hopefully it was giving some more insight on this question.
Yeah, for sure. And guys, I know we're at the top of the hour. I want to take one more question, because this is another one we have multiple on, and I'll just choose a one question on it. I didn't understand the flip it method explanation. Can you revisit that?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good point. Well, first of all, you have to watch that talk. So that's a brilliant talk. So the flip it to test it was like, if you that was an example that lady was using, I think Catherine. So seeing like, I had a man colleague asking for a raise, and I thought it was all fine. If a woman would do the same, would I feel the same way? If she's using something like this, not this one, but something similar. So she's like, there was a demonstration on the street, which ended up really badly, and the policeman had to had to apply, like brutal forces to, to push back the whatever enemies. If you replace the policeman with police women, the police women had to brutally push back whatever. Do you, do you still see the same thing, right? So that's what she means by flip it to test it. So when you have doubts with the situation, when you have concerns, when it's like, when you think about this one, maybe this is more helpful. You have a candidate who you want to hire, but that candidate is I don't know, is a minority member, and you are a little unsure whether that's the best candidate for the job. You can flip it to say, if that candidate was a 100% majority member, would I have the same concern, right? And and these flip it to test it situations can be brutally honest, because that really reveals your hidden, unconscious, not so shiny biases, how your brain is wired.
Okay. And I think we'll end it there. We are just at the top of the hour. Balazs, thank you so much for presenting today. This has been super insightful. Jason, Natalie, Brenna, thank you for coming on. Yellow, sorry you couldn't be here today, but thank you for supporting as well. For everyone on the call still, we are going to send the recording as well as the slides. They will all be available. You'll get that in an email within a couple of hours once the recording is ready to send. In that email, we will also have a handful of resources that are free to take. They're all about diversity and inclusion. And so please take advantage of those. Any questions we did not answer, we'll gather those up and try to get those out to you as well. Thanks a lot, everybody. And we'll see you next time on the next webinar.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day. Bye, guys.